Today on Bitchin' Music Facts, we tackle a mystery, a murder mystery. In the library, we find the still warm, bloated corpse of our symbol of Western classical music, the Symphony Orchestra. Now, we don't know for certain if the orchestra is dead, because that's a dead body, and I ain't about to touch that. That's pretty gross. We can only surmise that it is dead based on the tons of articles declaring its death, and the relatives who keep showing up to take a part of the estate. All that is left is the one lingering question: who killed the Symphony Orchestra? And why? We'll have to gather the usual and unusual suspects to solve this mystery and bring this killer to fictional justice. Was it the youth of today? Ah yes, the youth. With their Justin Bieber, their Instagram, Snapchatting away. These millennials neglected and abandoned the Symphony Orchestra like an old MySpace account. Or was it the Second Viennese School and its cronies? Their disregard for traditional harmonies drove the audience away like bees at a birthday party. Or was it our government and its love of money, whose constant cutting of the arts caused a ripple effect through our fragile symphonic system? Or perhaps it was someone we never suspected: recorded music. Has our love for convenience slowly killed the Symphony Orchestra? Jacob N. Weber and Kate Connolly believe so. Could they be right? But first, let's take a look at the history of the dying orchestra. Since about, forever, there have been prophecies of threats to serious music, or what we like to call classical music. Everything from the invention of the piano, individual composers, to even YouTube has been blamed for the demise of classical music as we know it. However, most of these claims have only been wild speculation or observation-based assumptions. To tackle all these catalysts of destruction, we'll need to break them into three basic categories: people, inventions, and money. Let's begin with people. A prevailing theory as to what is killing the symphony orchestra is the youth of today, with their lack of attention span, their preference for pop music, and the lack of cool factor that the orchestra generally has. Sorry, Yo-Yo, you're just not swaggity enough. All this should be evidence enough to point the blame firmly at the millennials, right? Well, let's take a look at the data. You could predict that you would see a smaller percentage of people 18 to 24 attending classical music events, and you would be right. According to the National Endowment of Arts survey of public participation in the arts, since 1982 to 2012, young adult attendance has declined 4.4%, from 11% to 6.6%. Now I know what you're thinking. There's a smoking gun. The youth don't care about the arts. And you'd be half right, except for one thing. When you look at the data of adults from 45 to 54 years of age from a shorter time span, 2002 to 2012, you find a greater decline in attendance. From 15.2% to 8.2%, a decline of 7% in just 10 years. This is doubly worrisome for the fact that that age group historically makes up the bulk of symphony attendance, with the median age of classical events being 47 to 49. Well, what about modernism? The harsh tones of 12-tone rows and the absurdity of John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds? All those modern composers drove both adults and kids alike from the concert halls, didn't they? Well, that theory doesn't quite hold water. According to BachTrack, 20th and 21st century music made up only 35% of all concert music worldwide and 42% of concert music in the US in 2010. That sounds like a large number, but you must take this into perspective. 20th century music is not a style of music. BachTrack makes a point to note that 20th century music is any music written after the year 1900. That means this, and this, and this, as well as this, all fall under the umbrella of 20th century music. In fact, a considerable part of orchestral literature is pieces by composers who maintained a tonal style throughout the 20th century, thus reducing that 35% greatly if we're only counting music of non-tonal and avant-garde traditions. Even then, that number still doesn't take into account new music festivals and new music ensembles who cater to a very specific audience and not the general public. That means the likelihood your mother will be shocked out of her seat at the symphony because of a Stockhausen piece is slim to none. Well, if it isn't youth culture, and it isn't modern music, then it must be the fast-paced media culture we live in. Just like Napster and MP3 did to Tower Records, inventions such as YouTube, Spotify, and even the gramophone have replaced the concert-going experience. Well, hold on there. Let's take a look at some facts. Or at least try to, because as you will see, it is hard to find concrete data on the correlation of new inventions and concert attendance. I would have liked to have begun with the gramophone. Unfortunately, we don't have enough statistical information about concert attendance during its invention. But we could surmise that the orchestra survived mostly in one piece, right? We can, however, get a rough idea of concert attendance during the years new inventions and services were launched to the public after 1982. If we look at the graph from earlier, calculate the rate of change between the time data was collected, and compare them to the launch years of YouTube, 2005 with a rapid growth in 2006, and Spotify, 2008, we can see a slight increase in the number of people leaving the concert halls during the launch of these online services. But remember, correlation does not equal causation, and we can see from 2008 through 2012 that the rate at which attendance falls decreases during this time period, the years at which these services really grew in popularity. We can now speculate that the launch of these online services did not cripple the symphony orchestra as predicted. However, how much it did hurt is hard to pin down due to the lack of statistical information, so for now, we cannot place the blame on YouTube or any invention for that matter. But what about the culprit of all culprits? Money. That's right, money, the root of all evil. Money, or lack thereof, is why the orchestras like the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, the New Mexico Symphony Orchestra, the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra, and the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra all filed for bankruptcy. It's the cause of lockouts and wage disputes among the Atlanta and Minnesota Symphony Orchestras. Money's evil claws haven't just torn up the U.S. symphonies, it has even managed to shut down the Greece National Symphony Orchestra. The effects of the financial crisis in 2008 left a mark on all of us, but none more so than the arts. When governments, schools, and ruling groups need to make financial cuts, the arts are usually the first to go. But that got me thinking, just how much help have we been getting from outside sources? As I dug for answers to that question, I was led down a rabbit hole that few in the music world dare to venture. What I found led me to my theory as to the real culprit to this murder. The true killer of the symphony orchestra is Mrs. Peacock with the dagger in the library.
She doesn't even go here!
Okay, the real killer of the symphony orchestra is the symphony itself. Let me explain. As I looked for clues, I decided to check in the most obvious of places, ticket sales. As expected and discussed earlier, ticket sales are declining. However, what I wasn't expecting was how little ticket sales make up the overall symphony budget. Roughly 25 to 30% of the operating costs of any given orchestra are made strictly from ticket sales. The rest of the money is made up purely in grants, endowments, and donations. Now, I know what you're saying. So what? That is the way things have always been. Well, therein lies the problem. The financial model that the orchestras have been relying on so heavily has stayed completely the same, but our economy has not. Let's take a look at a recent case, the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra bankruptcy filing. Looking at 2006, the Symphony Orchestra enjoyed revenues of $46,954. In 2007, those revenues went up to $52,108. But in 2008, this revenue suddenly dropped to $29,484. That was at the beginning of the recession. But if you take a look at their labor costs, their total expense costs, their labor expense ratio, you'll see that it stays generally the same every year despite the 2008 recession. Now, it's easy for us to blame the recession for the fall of the Symphony Orchestra, but symphonies have been filing for bankruptcy well before 2008. Instead, what these numbers show us is just how inflexible the current financial model is. This inflexibility has led symphonies to the problem it's facing now, a problem known as the Baumol effect, also known as the Baumol cost disease. Essentially, the Baumol effect is when salaries rise within an organization or company, but the productivity does not. This effect was first described by William J. Baumol and William G. Bowen in 1960s when discussing, of all things, the performing arts. The two men pointed out that the same number of musicians is needed to play a Beethoven string quartet as it was needed in the 19th century. That is, the productivity of classical music performance has not increased. On the other hand, real wages of musicians, as well as other professions, have increased greatly since the 19th century. But that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? Music is to be performed the way the composer intended. Though true, it doesn't excuse the fact that despite music being the same since the 19th century, the supposed fixed labor cost has instead risen greatly. And you can't blame musicians for that either. They want what everyone else wants, a stable income and a competitive living wage. As musicians, it's natural for us to desire to be compensated for the amount of work it took to learn our art. And for the most part, orchestras have been trying to do that. By raising salaries to match or exceed the standard of living, paying top dollar for highly talented musicians, and offering multi-year labor contracts to musicians and conductors despite the unpredictability of the economy. All these funds add up, and with the majority of orchestral funds coming from the ever-changing kindness of people's hearts, we are left with an organization that has more fatal stab wounds than the teenager at Camp Crystal Lake. The orchestra model of financing themselves on donations of the very wealthy may have worked in the past, but now there are a plethora of other charities and organizations competing for those donation dollars. Organizations that not only ask for more money, but actually get it. The Symphony Orchestra is leaking money fast, trying to maintain this high and often unrealistic financial standard, and no amount of Hello Kitty Band-Aids or Kisses from Mama are going to help. But maybe there is hope. We have the technology. We can rebuild it. Faster, stronger, shinier, and dare I say, sexier than ever before. Many people have proposed ideas of fixing this problem. Will they work? Subscribe and find out next time on Bitchin' Music Facts. Thanks for watching.